Kia ora, ko Genevieve aho. I'm a PhD student at the University of Auckland, doing research around the familial care practices and identity work of Filipino migrants here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In this presentation, I focus on the sending of financial remittances to kin in the Philippines. I argue that these financial remittances are acts of affective care that are laden with meaning for both senders and receivers that help to maintain the family across distances. I further advance that this practice is an example of bricolage used by Filipino transnational family members, where the practice of doing family is transformed as families improvise using available resources in order to provide support to family back home. Now, Duncan understands agency as that tendency of people to make pragmatic decisions in order to adapt to their changing circumstances, which he theorizes as bricolage. Bricolage is that process by which people draw from existing traditions, laws, and social and cultural norms to patch together new ways of doing things, in this case, of doing family. Now, doing family was conceptualized by Morgan, who says that as a unit of sociological analysis, the family can best be more effectively thought of as the collection of practices that constitute the foundations of familyness, creating a familial culture and a way of being, rather than as an abstract social entity of a specific set of others with whom we share a common sense of identity. These family practices can comprise of activities that we normally think of as kin work or family obligations that create a sense of familyness that is predicated on care and security, both social and material. Indeed, a family obligation is writ large in Filipino culture, where the family holds primacy over all others. Thus, the parents expect their children's gratitude and respect, while children expect to honor their parents by providing support and care to them as their parents' capacities diminish in old age or as the adult child's capacity increases. In a traditional sense, this is how Filipinos do family. But this doing of family is complicated by transnationalism, where Filipino migrants become incapable of providing the practical care that's expected. So, among my participants, the challenges presented by distance is mitigated through the sending of money remittances, which become substitutes for the embodied expressions of love and affection afforded by proximity. In so doing, my participants improvise using the resources available to them in their new and vastly different material, social, and cultural contexts, reinventing the practice of doing family into something that's not entirely new, but different through the process of bricolage. Of a population of approximately 101 million, there are currently over 10 million Filipino migrants in some 200 countries and territories worldwide, including over 72,600 currently resident in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, as I've implied, Filipino migrants are often motivated by the desire to improve the financial situations of their families back home, and remittance sending has become a huge industry in the Philippines. On this slide are some of the more popular remittance sending services used by my participants. Now, the World Bank reported that these Filipinos worldwide sent 35.1 billion US dollars in 2019, comprising 9.3% of the Philippines' GDP that year, and making the country the fourth top remittance receiver in the world, preceded by India, China, and Mexico. Now, to many Westerners, it's a curiosity why Filipinos send money to their families back home, even when their own financial situations are precarious. Now, as a Filipina, to me, it can be simple and commonsensical. Where I cannot give my mother a hug, I order online for her a book that she's been wanting, or where I can't celebrate holidays with my family. I send money to go towards that celebration, where I never used to do these things when I was near them. Now that I'm in New Zealand, this is now how I do family. Yeah, it can be more complicated than this. In her study among Filipino migrants, Mackay found that her participants and their families back home gauged their intimacy in economic terms. This factored into their calculus to determine the correct balances between the expression of closeness, the actual financial need, and the available resources. Now, these pragmatic determinations, or bricolaging, if you will, creates the desired effect, such that in his own study among Filipino migrants in Japan, McCallum's participants indicated that they understood financial remittances as emotional closeness. Furthermore, McCallum found that the willingness to provide, especially where one's resources is limited, can be more important than the actual provision. Thus, we can begin to think of financial remittances beyond their monetary value. In transnationalism, money remittances is an enactment of intimacy, or what McCallum refers to as affectionate remittances, which reconfigures what the doing of family looks like in proximity. Now, financial remittances enable migrants and their families to engage in shared narratives as they discuss, devise, and enact plans relating to financial decisions. Among my participants, this is evident in the micro business ventures that they invest in. So according to Maganda, my husband's mom is always trying to start a business. So we provide the capital and the business doesn't pan out. Then she starts something new. It kind of feels heavy, but you know that they're trying to not rely on you. If you don't give them the capital, you can expect to give them more regularly. Whereas if you give them the capital, you know they can be self-sustaining, even though it doesn't last that long. There will be a certain period of time when they become self-sustaining. Now, this constant provision of capital investment, knowing full well that the venture is likely not going to succeed, is a doing of family on Maganda's and her husband's part, because it speaks of a willingness to support their parents despite anticipated failure. Everyone involved intuitively understands that it's not about the success or failure of the enterprise. Rather, it's in enabling their parents to develop self-efficacy and to feel pride, that the pride that comes with being self-sufficient, even though it's temporary. This is explained more plainly by Darna when he talks about his mother's little corner store. Oh, the store's insolvent. There's nothing to sell. You replenish with another 20,000 and then it's gone again. How come you have no goods to sell again, Ma? I actually don't know. So I have to give them more money. That's another thing that I've come to accept over time. Maybe that's where they get their everyday expenses from, pay their electricity bill. That's okay with me as long as they're happy. In terms of investment, the store is a losing proposition because whatever proceeds are derived gets spent on their day-to-day expenses. Now, Darna can very well just give them the money directly rather than going the roundabout way of replenishing their inventory to sell. However, this way, he gives his parents an occupation. He gives them a purpose. In invoking his parents' happiness, we can see that what matters more is that the store affords his parents the dignity of thinking that they're paying for their day-to-day needs from their own profits instead of asking for it from Darna. So in these examples, my participants do family through, as according to Mackay, shared narratives of aspirations for familial progress. Beneath the obvious, these material remittances are suffused with the desire to make their parents happy, to develop their capabilities and their sense of independence. In this manner, the doing of family is transformed. Now, perhaps some of the more heartbreaking examples of bricolage are when participants have to make pragmatic decisions pertaining to sick family members. A number of my participants have had to forego being with their sick loved ones in order to be able to send money to pay for the costs of those illnesses and sometimes death. At the time of the interview, Tala's mother had been sick and bedridden and non-responsive for a number of years. Tala wanted nothing more than to be with her mother in her remaining years. And however, she said, I think that's my responsibility to my mom, to my family back home. And if I don't do it, my mom really has no one to rely on. We need to accept the fact that my mom won't be able to go back to her normal, and we're just waiting for the time when she's gone. And the doctor has also said, and looking at her, it's evident that she's really not going to live much longer. Tala's mother passed away this last August, and Tala is inconsolable in her grief, her guilt, and her regret at not having been by her mother's bedside, just as Diwata was when her father died while she was here in New Zealand. That was my biggest frustration, that I was never there. I wasn't there when he died. I was torn if I should go home or not because I was the one supporting. He was in the hospital for more than a month, but the doctors said it was not necessary because his situation became okay. I was hoping he would survive it. I wasn't sure my employer would allow me to go home. So I said, I'll just stay here for the moment because I need to make money, because I know we've experienced it before. We got buried in debt. These decisions are very difficult to make and come at personal and relational costs, to the extent that we privilege close physical proximity as a normative way of doing family. Now, just slightly over half of my participants self-declared as coming from low class and lower middle class families, and the doing of family would look very different had they not migrated. For instance, as a registered nurse in the Philippines, Darna, whose father is also sick, earned 8,000 pesos a month. That's approximately 228 New Zealand dollars. Now, while he was already giving half of his salary to his family back then, delivering his family from poverty is an act of doing family that he would never be able to fulfill had he stayed in the Philippines. There was no way he could have paid for the university education of three of his siblings, fund the business ventures of his sister and his mother, cover the majority of his family's needs back home, as well as his father's medical costs. Yet, from afar, he cannot be with them when he needs to be. Darna said, his medications is all that keeps him alive. If I stop supporting, he'll go straight to the morgue. We've already accepted it. Hypertension and diabetes. He will be end stage renal failure. He told me that if at some point I deteriorate, don't come home. I've already accepted it anyways. We're in the stage of hospice and palliative care. I think over time you realize life, you'd rather choose a comfortable death process rather than fighting for it. You're looking for organs to replace the kidneys. What a situation to be in, knowing that if he were unable to remit money for medication, his father's passing would be accelerated. What choice is there? We can see how these three participants engage in explicit and implicit negotiations with their doctors, with their loved ones, with themselves, as they rationalize immediate and potential courses of action. And in that way, changing the way they do family. Bricolaging is evident in the negotiations and pragmatic decisions all of these participants make between the human desire of being close to their loved ones or the family's survival. To the uninitiated, their choice can seem irrational. However, to these participants, the emotional labor involved in these acts of sacrifice are the ultimate enactment of family. The sending of financial remittances extend beyond instances of gifting and reaffirming relationships. Rather, these are performative links between the migrants and their families back home. Through the sending of remittances, my participants transform the doing of family in such a manner that they're able to ensure that the family endures, even if their sick loved ones did not or do not. In so doing, the practice of family is innovatively reinvented into something not quite new, but different. Thank you very much.